Okay, well, welcome. We don't have a lot of names from yesterday. There's a few of you, so bear with us for the front matter, but we did change it up a little bit for you, so you're not going to see the same thing each time. Welcome to our third session for grade 2, and we are going to be unpacking For You Matter, which is a big organizing idea, to say the least. So we have lots of things that we're going to share with you. We're going to try not to fly through them, but in some respects, we probably will. My name is Chris Arski, for those of you who have not been with us before, and we do have new people joining us this time. I am one of the consultants with CARC, and I have a fantastic partner that I work with who is really the brains behind all the concepts and everything that are going on, and I am going to let him introduce himself.
Wow, that's a scary introduction. My name is Ted Zeroni. I'm not necessarily the brains for sure. Anyways, I am Ted Zeroni. I'm working at Sherwood Park, and I'm working with as a consultant with the Edmonton Regional Learning Consortium. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for taking time in your busy day to be with us after school here.
All right, so as always, we're going to encourage you to just chime in. It's easier if you unmute yourself and ask a question while we're going along, if something comes to mind. By all means, use the chat box, but we don't always catch the question right off the bat. So don't want to be missing somebody if there's something that you had in the back of your mind. But as always, just whatever you're comfortable with and just see where you can go from there. Okay, I'm going to begin with our acknowledgement. And in the spirit of reconciliation, we want to acknowledge that this gathering is taking place on traditional lands across the province of Alberta, home to many diverse Indigenous, Métis, and Inuit peoples. We acknowledge that this land is a traditional meeting ground, giving voice to its original peoples and the story of creation of this country in a way that history has forgotten. And with our acknowledgement, where possible, I'm going to try and include some references for appropriate First Nation links to the organizing idea that we are unpacking at that particular time. So I'm going to play this very short clip because I think it will be helpful to maybe to give a little bit of context to some of the things that we're doing as well.
The water is in the story, the origin of life. Talks about these women, grandmothers, that were asked by the Creator which ones will come here. First one, Creator asked, he made that one the moon, grandmother. Second one, he made into Mother Earth. The third one, he made into water. That's the life. There's lots of life in that water. It's a woman, grandmother. The fourth one, he made into an image of woman we see walking around on earth today. That one carry life into this world for the Creator. That's where we're born from. And there's more to that. But for now, just so you know, for us people, what we're trying to do is preserve what we have. Canada's built on our traditions, built on our stories, because we were the first ones here. Everything that Canada is come from us. So if you go back to that story and know where we come from, the woman is strong, but today the woman's voice is taken out of decision-making processes in this system. That's why there's chaos. There's no more balance in that with respect to how the relationships go. That's what I was told by my grandfathers in my ceremony. We always hear this term growing up. What kind of a world are we going to leave for our children? Everything's being poisoned off. I ask, what kind of a child are we going to leave for the world? If we don't teach our children the proper way to respect Mother Earth, if we don't talk to our children and our grandchildren how to respect the environment, how to respect those birds, those animals, the trees, what kind of a world is that going to be?
Okay, so as we had mentioned before, and for those of you who are new, we just want to reiterate a little bit about these sessions that we're putting on. They're obviously time limited, and we appreciate you coming after school, and we know you've had busy days, especially with the crazy weather. But we want to be able to unpack enough information that hopefully as you walk away from here, you have the confidence and feel like you have a bit of a sense of direction as to where this particular learning organizing idea is moving. We don't want you to feel like you have to plan everything on your own. We are certainly not within an hour going to be able to share the whole unit with you, but as best we can, we'd like to unpack it. So that sense of efficacy, that sense that you have some tools in your toolbox that you could grab, even if you're not doing this unit right now, that you can go back to it and say, yeah, there was some things in there that I could use now when I do my planning. That's really our hope for these sessions. We also are welcoming feedback. If you are looking for something more than what we give you in the session, please don't hesitate to say that. I'll ask again at the end. If you don't feel comfortable throwing in a chat or muting yourself and just talking about it, then just send us an email, because you're not going to hurt our feelings. This has got to work for you. So it's a time for us really to just be present together, to engage in whatever we can in the time that we have available to us, and for you to share your expertise as well. Many of you have been teaching this grade for a long time, and you've got background knowledge in areas of the organizing ideas. So if you have things that you'd like to share at any particular time, please don't hesitate to come out with that. So as we presented once before, these are the areas that we're covering, and grade 2 covers everything except the space unit is the only thing that we don't do. And so we will be moving through, and Earth systems will be our next one that we're going to be looking at. So you all have, or should have, and if you don't have at the end, I'll show you where to find it, the numbered outcomes document, because that's kind of what we've been using when we reference things in the slide deck. Do you have to use it? No, but just so that you know what we're using and what we're referencing. It's the same document that you get from the government, just it has numbered, we have numbered the outcomes in there. And what we want to do is just quickly unpack, not this whole document, just the important pieces of it. And that is that organizing idea is always in the darkest line on the top of these documents, regardless of which curriculum you look at. The darkest line has your organizing idea, and it tells you what idea it is behind the very first word behind it, in this case, matter, tells you which ones I'm working on. The reason we want to go back to this sentence or this overarching organizing idea is because this is where you find your big rocks, your essential learner outcomes, your big concept. And the concept generally span K to 6 or grade 1 to 6. So those are big ideas that are hitting all of those grades. And how we're unpacking that one big idea or two big ideas, if you think of it as an inverted triangle, that sentence or that statement is the base of the triangle, and we've got the point going down towards your learner outcome in your grade. We're fine-tuning it down, and you get very specific as you head towards your learner outcome. So that's the piece that we really want to make sure that we're all clear on using at the same time. The other pieces that we want to look at right now would be, is this the right slide, Ted? Yes, okay. So when we're looking at this one, I just want to look at some terminology with you very quickly, because the terminology that we see in that document, that big document, is there are some things that are flexible, and then there are some things that are open that we have some choice about. And other ones, we've got to make sure that we stick to it. So let's just quickly look at two that we're looking at today. So properties of materials can be compared, including, so transparency, malleability, reflection. This one kind of hits two of the things we want to talk about in one place. First of all, the word include, anything that comes behind the word include means that those are must-dos. Somewhere in our lessons, we have to make sure that those terms, examples, whatever it is that's behind the word include is in our lesson. That does not mean that you have to stop there and that's the only things that go into your lesson. If you have other things that you want to include, if you have other things that you have found extremely successful, then by all means include those. But these are the must pieces that have to be in the lessons. Anything that's in the bracket is generally a term that is related to science that we need to teach the children in that grade. In this case, we have words like transparency, malleability, reflection. So these are words that we need to make sure the grade twos know. But as I'm doing an activity with them, I might not always just keep using transparency, malleability. I might just use some more user-friendly, age-appropriate language and water it down a little bit for them. So you have that flexibility when you see the bracketed words. We have to teach it, but you don't always have to use it every time you're talking about that particular one. And then the last one is such as. So such as are as they're giving you examples that follow such as. Those might be examples that you think, yeah, well, those are perfect. Those are exactly what I would want to talk about. Then go ahead and use them. If they're not related to the area that you live in, or the example does not resonate with your students because of maybe, again, the area you live in, then you're free to change it. You're also free to use them and add your own to it. So such as gives you a lot more flexibility. Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to Ted, who's going to take us on an adventure through concepts. And I really want you to listen closely to what he has to say, because it ties into how we're going to unpack the resources that I'm going to give you. All right, take it away, Ted.
Thanks, Chris. I maybe will begin with a little bit of a warning. I probably will be cutting in and out as I speak. If it starts becoming too annoying, Chris, maybe I did take over and I can be your sidekick and support where we want to go. Because I think I may be going in and cutting in and out. I do apologize for that. Those of you who were in my previous session, the opening here is a little bit similar, and some of my message will be similar. If you've heard, it's going to be a bit of a change to it, and so I just like to bear with me here, because if we're adding some new stuff to this front end that I think are really important to get a grasp of. What I'm going to be doing, that Chris keeps on referring to, is really building a framework or the structure of how we're going to unpack this curriculum. So I'm going to sort of be building a skeleton, and Chris is going to be filling that skeleton. She's got the wonderful ideas and the things that will really elaborate on the things that I'm talking about. But before I do move on, I do want to mention one thing, that this curriculum is easily taken as a checklist approach, that you can go through the knowledge, the understandings, and the skills, and just do those things there, and you can be done in a short while. But if we risk doing something, if we do it that way, we really risk having an opportunity to really help our kids learn some skills and move them and help them into the future. We know we have a future that is very unpredictable. It's constantly changing. Technology, social media is creating a world that is so different than the one that we grew up with. And Chris, if I could just have you play that video clip, this is an example of things that are coming down the road. the fluidity of that robot is so human-like. And if you ever tried to Google facial features on robots, find little videos of robots that have facial features of humans. Every little movement from the eyes to little wrinkles that happen when they smile are so realistic. We can have robots probably in a short while. I wouldn't be surprised if we see them in the service industry where we know that there's a labor shortage, things like that. So the point is that it's really unpredictable, changing. What do we want our kids to take with them when they leave our classrooms, when they leave our schools down the road? And I think we all know that the really things that really matter are those, not just the knowledge pieces, but understandings, skills, and attitudes. It shows up on the next slide, and really the competencies that has been out for a while are really things that need to be developed within our students and given opportunities to learn about and how to become competent at all those things, as well as strong with the reading and writing and the numeracy as well. If we take this curriculum and just do it as a checklist and work at the very basic level, we're going to miss those things. We're going to miss the competencies and those other things that we know are really going to be so important for the kids when they leave our school. So what I'm going to offer you today is a way to look at the curriculum and to instruct up to it so that you can play a role in helping making sure those kids get what they need to be successful in the future. And I'd like to begin with a concept attainment activity. You're probably familiar with these. You've got the T-chart with the yes and no. The yes are examples of things that I have in common, and the no's are the nots. If you look at that list carefully, you'll see that there's something similar about those things in that list that make them part of that yes list. The no items don't have what it takes to be a yes. They're missing that something. So to do a concept attainment lesson, what you or the students, if you do this with the students, have to do is focus on those attributes that make a yes a yes. If you think about that, I'm going to throw some, we're going to go through this quickly. I would show all the yeses and nos one at a time so that the thought process can slow down for the students a little bit. But then you throw some other ones and then ask, well, what is it? Where would you fit courage? Where would you fit water? How about Christmas? And you know, what you want to do is go through this without having kids saying, well, I know what a yes is. It's, can you give examples? Provide examples. Can you categorize them? And what I'm going to do in the next slide is categorize those for you. Courage and truth are examples, and Christmas and where aren't. And what I'm giving you examples of concepts. And concepts are really organizing ideas. They are ideas that have examples, and all the examples share that attribute. So we know that the story is a concept because there are many different types of stories that make them. So they have an end, characters, conflict, and somehow the problem is resolved in a story. So there's attributes that make it so. So there are more examples. A car is a concept, and we know that there's different examples of cars, but they all have the distinctive attributes that make it a car. Same with a truck. And of course, you get some gray concepts in the middle there that has the attributes of both, and perhaps we have to make a new category or a new concept if that doesn't fit. A car truck, maybe. I'd like to.
So great Venn diagram.
Pardon me?
It'd be a great Venn diagram.
It could be a great Venn diagram. Mm-hmm. Where would that one go? And there's new cars, I think, starting to look have those same characteristics. Moving on then. Some other things to remember about concepts is we know that they can be fairly broad or fairly specific. For example, transportation is fairly, and when we get into car and truck, we're getting even more specific with those ideas. We'll probably find is that in the disciplines, your subject areas, those disciplines, the more specific the concepts will be. Transportation, or the word system, or the concept of change, independence, those are fairly broad. And those are all the courses through all of the disciplines, but more specific concepts such as ecosystem is more discipline specific. You wouldn't really be investigating ecosystem in language arts, well, you would in science, but you could investigate change in language arts, and it is a broader concept. And finally, one other thing about concepts on the next slide, that they can be organized and connected with each other. It's hard to connect concept pieces together, but you can connect concepts together. And what I've done here is taken out of the organizing idea matter for grade 2 and linked them together. And hopefully it provides some meaning. And I'm going to take some time to read this one through with you so you get some meaning of all these ideas in here, because it took me a while to really get fully grasp it myself. And I just want to share with you. And the way I'd like to is to start with the concept material at the top. You know, the materials can be, this is what your organizing idea is trying to help students understand, that materials can be both natural or processed, and they combine to make an object. And that object is sometimes called a product when out of the material. Now, objects have purposes, and that purpose really impacts our choice. And our choice is going to be the suitability of materials to make that object. So those are some of the key ideas here. Looking at the top again, we know that materials do have properties, and some of those properties are listed there. And we know that the properties themselves can be tested, measured, described, and observed. And some of these concepts, as Chris is going to talk about later, are covered in grade 1. These are a lot of the concepts from there. So there may be having to backward to do. But continuing on to understand what this organizing idea is all about is that we can move on more to the top and say that materials can be natural materials, and natural materials are often used by the Inuit, First Canadian, Métis to make objects. And we can continue. We also know that the Inuit, First Nation, and Métis consider those things, time of year, sustainability, and so on, when making a choice, down to choice again, about the suitability of the material for their product. So while things may seem interrelated and kind of go, they kind of go hand in hand. What it does is it builds a very huge organizing idea with really a lot of stuff in there. And as Chris goes through her examples, some resources you can use, there's just a tremendous amount of material. But that's pretty much a picture of this organizing idea.
Did you want to go to the link or not?
Well, I have it there in case people want to go to, that just goes to, I thought maybe if someone wants to link on it and zoom into it when they go through the slide deck themselves, they can do that. So with a better understanding of what a concept is, it's that organizing idea. It's kind of like a file folder. We can use what is called the conceptual lens to help our students and ourselves focus in on things. So the way the conceptual lens works is like this. I've given you a photo there. And what I'd like you to do is look at that photo and focus on things through the concept of a resource. Look at it through the lens of resources. Some things may come to mind. You may see that there's water there as a resource. The sand is a resource. The setting is likely a lake or a beach or somewhere, which is it could be a natural resource in terms of a park, which then would change things up if I ask you, where's the location of this? And you focus on different things to get a sense of the location. Now, if I told you to use the conceptual lens or ask you to do the lens of the senses, you would start focusing on other things. You might focus on the coolness of the sand or the texture of the sand, the scent of the water or the lake, if that's where you're by, the sounds that might be around you. You're focusing on different things when you are given a different conceptual lens. And so I'd like to look at this curriculum with you through two lenses, two different conceptual lenses. The first is the lens of concepts. Concepts are plastered throughout this unit of all the units, and it can be found in the learner outcomes, such as the one stated there. And they're also identified in the CUSPs, the knowledge, understanding, skills, procedures. I'd like you to just take a moment and see if you can identify some of those words in there that are concepts that we need to in this unit. Or I shouldn't call it unit, I should call it organizing idea.
You can just jot them down. You don't have to put them in a chat box or anything.
Let's give you a few seconds to take a look at that, or to try to identify some, and then have them pop out at you. Go ahead, Chris. They are highlighted in red. Now, some of them are more specific and broader than others, but you can see something happening. You can see that the concepts in the learner outcome are the most common ones throughout the knowledge, understanding, skills, procedures. So you get a sense that those are some of the key ones that we're going to, but there are some other secondary ones that are play a supporting role that we're going to need students to learn as well. There are some that you may have missed, and I call those skill-related concepts. And the next slide will point out a couple of those, some more of those to you. They will be the ones that will be highlighted in purple. If students are going to do something, they're going to generate an investigation. Or if they're going to state or relate to things, they're going to state a relationship. If they're going to determine something, they're going to make a determination, and so on. And some of these do become important later, especially when we take a look at the skills and procedures, because if you know what a comparison and contrast is, for example, you'll be able to understand the steps into creating a comparison contrast, because you have a good conceptual understanding of what it is that's being asked of you. But those are a lot of words, and it can get really confusing. So the important thing is to just stop and take back and try to figure out, well, what are those really important ones? What are the key concepts in organizing idea? And we call those anchor concepts. And that's the next slide. I've sort of eliminated all the ones that are repeated, and you can see, well, it does narrow down to just a few key concepts that are really essential. And the next slide will leave more. Those are the things that we'll want to anchor. You'll see that those repeated throughout that organizing idea. You'll see that those are repeated in the guiding question. How can the suitability of materials be determined? And again, the learning outcome itself, students investigate property and relate them to a purpose. So those 5 words are important ones, or concepts, are ones that you're going to have to really keep on working with and develop and develop and develop. But we're going to change gears a little bit and now look through the curriculum through a different lens, and that's the skills and procedure, which are those doing words. We can go to the next slide, Chris. Actually, Chris, I'm going to have you go right to that link. And I want to point out 3 things about the skills and procedures column. And when you're looking through it, some things to keep in mind. First of all, that list there are all the skills and concept states with this organizing idea. So the first thing you want to do is identify the skill or procedure. That's that verb, that doing word. And you can see that I've listed some. You'll see some have 2, for example, down with 2M1.5, compare the properties. Really, there's 2 things involved there. Compare the properties to determine what material is best. We're going to be evaluating there. When you identify or isolate the skill, you'll notice that there's a certain structure to all these statements. We can go to that slide, Chris. Yeah. On the left is the one part of that statement. It's that verb part. And then the other side is that knowledge and understanding part. For example, identify, and then something that's out of the curriculum, the materials used to make various objects. test something from the knowledge part, so something from the knowledge part. And so there's those two parts to it. Now that creates what you'll need to do when that happens is make sure to separate out. If you're going to have kids relate, or you're going to sort, or you're going to have them compare, which is one that shows up a little bit later on. To help kids understand how to compare and contrast before you give them the task here to compare and contrast the stuff from their curriculum, because you don't want them to compete their knowledge and understanding of the content versus their ability to produce the skill. You want to give them feedback on compare and contrast. When they get good at it, then you can attach the knowledge piece to it. I think we can click back and go back to the slideshow, Chris.
Okay.
Oh, it's right there. I missed that one. No, it's all right. No, keep going, keep going. So there's really the 3 tips. Is that you look through the lens of the skills and processes, make sure to identify the skill, clarify it, and ensure that they're competent in it. I'm going to have you go back to that link one more time, Chris. Sorry, down at the bottom.
Yep.
Yeah,
It's
that one. Yeah, it was that one. Now I've identified the ones in red there that can be problematic because it's unclear what they really mean, and you have to really read the statement carefully to get a good sense of what it means. For example, identify materials used to make various objects. Well, in a sense, what they're going to say, let's say there is a plastic cup with wooden. What they'll say, well, the material used is wood and plastic. So they're classifying something is what they're doing when they're doing that. Same with identify a common object or structure that can be made from different materials. Okay, they're really and plugging into a box, so really classifying. Measure is pretty straightforward. And then when we take a look at the compare section, you'll see there's 2 parts, like I mentioned to that. The first is to compare the properties. The second part, if you're determining what material is best for a specific purpose, you're really evaluating that material, you're judging it. And so there's 2 parts that we have to make sure that kids are getting when we dive into some of these things. So back to the slideshow, Chris. So at the end of the day, then we've got some key skills, and we've got some anchoring concepts that we want to help students learn. And we know that when students learn something, they can learn it on 3 different levels: at a surface level, a deep level, or the ability to transfer it. So what we want to help our students do is maneuver having a skill that they can use at a surface level, use at a deep level, and then transfer that skill to a new situation. Same with that goes with the concepts. We want them to know a concept at a surface level, what it means, a deep understanding, and then transferring that to a new situation. To help us maneuver through that, this is where the matching comes in. And this is where, if we really want our kids to be ready and have the skills and attributes to deal with that crazy future that's coming up, we want to make sure that we use the appropriate instructional approaches for each of those parts of the learning process. So at the surface level, when it comes to skills, I have a link there, and you don't have to go there, Chris. You'll have these links available to you in the slide deck and in the folder later on. But there's this, if we do know, research shows if you take a skill and you teach it directly, break it out and say, all right, everybody, today we're going to learn how to do this, teach it directly, and give lots of practice with it and feedback. There's a high value process to help kids with those skills. So if it's compare and contrast, you spend your time talking about it, practicing it, giving feedback on it, and that's at surface level. We know that some of the strategies to help understanding concepts at the surface level is the concept attainment approach. And I use that at the beginning of the lesson to help understand or help introduce at least the concept of concept. But you can use it to introduce other concepts and have criteria on similarity and differences, because the direct instruction sample that you're going to is a comparison and contrast one. It's streamlined. If you saw it once before, it's a streamlined one. So kids will need to know what those concepts of criteria and similarity difference are before they actually do the skill. Are all kinds of teaching approaches for each parts of those of that learning process. I think I'm missing one slide, and maybe the next one, Chris. This, we can go that one. I might have this slide out of joint. No, I'm just going to talk about surface and deep surface learning. If you're not familiar with this, is that this is where kids know the stuff. They know what a concept is. They can define it, and there are some assessment ideas there when you're thinking about, do the kids really understand this concept? Do they really know what do they know this skill? There are several things you can do to help make sure they do. And of course, those instructional approaches will help. When it gets to the deep part of learning, kids will want to demonstrate that they understand not only the concepts, but how they're related to other concepts. And I'll go through an example with you shortly. And then can they transfer that to a new, if it's comparing and contrasting, can they do it can they compare and contrast two things? Can they do it at a deep level by talking about and doing the metacognition about it when they're actually doing that? And can they take comparing and contrasting to a totally new context that they've never seen before, a new situation where they might have to do it, and they say, I'll have to contrast before I do that. So when it comes to, I think I've got that, a sample assessment of where you can go with this, and when we're assessing skills and processes. The example that I have here is assessing a concept at different levels. One of the key, as I mentioned, is the concept of properties. So one way at the surface level to know they're getting this at the surface level is to basically ask them for what it means. When they say object has properties, what does that mean? And basically asking for the definition. Quite often we stop there. We give kids definitions of things and they memorize it. They pass the test. And that's a very basic surface level understanding. But we want to make sure they have a really good, solid understanding. And so you can ask them this question: which of the following are examples of properties of objects? When I say it has a size, is that an example of an object's property? When I say it is blue, is that a property? Is it heavy? I can use it. If kids can identify those, then they're distinguished between examples of property and non-property. So saying it is blue is not a property, it's identifying the color, okay, but it has a size, that's a property, okay. It can bend, that's a property, okay. But identifying it's saying it's heavy is identifying the property of weight. And so we want to distinguish between those. And then you could give them some other questions. What property am I describing this? Of course, the brackets is what you'll want them to identify. And then that's the surface level. All right, they can understand it. They take that individual concept of property and they can manipulate it. Right, they can give examples, non-examples. In the middle column is that understanding piece. All right, so we can do all those things to assess the individual concepts and those ideas in the knowledge section. We can give kids saying here, compare and contrast these two things, and then we could analyze. We can give them their comparison and contrast, so we know they got the skill. But how do you assess that understanding, that middle part? And that's really what that deep part's all about. Here's an example of how one might assess the understanding a student has, a deep understanding of property. You may want to have something, an object, and then give them this task and say, here, everybody, we've got an object here, and it's the material is made out of whatever you choose there. And so it could be made out of glass or plastic. It could be a ruler, which might be a good one to do. And then you go through the whole process of filling this chart together. What color is this? And you describe it. Now, did we get color based on an observation, measurement, or a test? Now, all these concepts, observation and measurement and description, those are all grade 1 concepts. So you kind of have to make sure they understand what an observation is and what a measurement is. An observation is that's everything we gather based on our senses. And a measurement is using a tool, and a test is doing something to that thing to figure it out. So color, we could say it's red, and O for observation. Sound, it's no sound, it's an observation we make, right? And so you would go through all that with the class, and some of those properties you can only figure out by being tested. So if it's malleability, you have to test it to see if you can bend it. Measurement, you'll have to figure out how to measure it. Maybe it's so many toothpicks long or so on, but you can figure that. And so you'll fill that chart in together with the class. And if you could scroll down, Chris. So what I've highlighted to you is the understanding that's listed in there. So we know the kids know what a property is. We know that they've been able to contrast or build a chart. But now you want to know, do kids understand the materials have properties that can be observed, described, tested, and are measured? Do they have that understanding? What we've often done in the past is we've given them that understanding and say, so materials have properties that can be observed, described, tested, and so on. But this is something you're assessing the kids, do they have that understanding? You want them to create that meaning, and if they can create that, they have that deep understanding. So you might ask them that question. Take a look at the chart and how we filled it out. What does this tell you about properties of materials? And if they can be, and you probably wouldn't want to include the other things, but look at that chart and say, tell me what does it say about property materials and their properties? They can be described, they can be tested, they can be observed, and they can be measured, is what we want to bring out. And if they can see that in that chart, then you know you've got a deep understanding of the concepts and a concept property. Because now property is related to materials, property is related to observation, property is related to just description, right? And it's when we relate those ideas together that understanding of using it in a way that demonstrates understanding. They're not just restating something that they've memorized. And Chris, we can go on to the next slide.
Oh, that's it.
Yeah, I'm almost done, and Chris is going to fill in. With Chris, are a whole ton of different ideas and activities that are just amazing. She's gotten a whole lot of things, but as she's going through her list and showing her examples, try to look at it through the lens of surface learning, deep learning, and transfer learning. Where would they fit in? How can I use this of it to deepen their understanding? And there are some activities that will transfer their understanding as well. They're going to be given a chance to show they understand things in a different context than what you've done through the class learning. I just want to point one other thing out to you, and I do want to mention one other thing, is that if this is a new way of looking at a curriculum, and it can be daunting when you have to, like, how do I I'm good at the surface stuff, but how do I get them to go to the deep stuff? Do it slowly, do it one step at a time. It's that whole point of taking little steps, trying it out, because when you take a teaching approach and try to assess it in a different way, you're going to build your repertoire over a long period of time. It's not going to happen overnight. To help you out a little bit, there is a planning tool. Chris, if you can click on it, and I'll just go through some of the highlights that might come in handy. I haven't completely filled it out. But some things here for each organizing idea, there's a planning tool. This one's for matter. It's got a link to the concept map that I showed you on the right-hand side, which is really at the end of the day, the second sheet to this document. You'll see it listed on the bottom menu where it says concept map, and it's got the organizing idea and so on. There's drop-down menus for all of the cusps, for all the knowledge, the understandings and skills and processes. And so you can choose one. So this is a good way that I would maybe want to keep track of where you're at. So I know that what I've just done so far is if I used those sample lessons that I didn't click on, the comparison and contrast, the similarities and difference and criteria lessons, if I did those, I would have known that I would have hit those critical thinking, those competencies. I know that I was target those skills and understandings. And if you'd scroll up, I can keep track of the assessments that I use. I meant scroll down, sorry, Chris, to the bottom of the document. That those are organizing things, the concept you'll want to cover and so on. And then scroll up one more to surface. That's okay. Anyway, that tool is there for you to use. It's hard. Yeah, I don't have control over the thing, so it's hard for me to point things out. But if you tinker around with it, you'll see how you can organize your learning activities with this. And you could choose instructional, whatever you might want to do to help you just sort of keep things in mind and keep everything organized in one spot as you maneuver through the lesson. So I've hopefully built a framework for you with what we mean by the key concepts and skills and why they're important in that whole learning process of search and transfer. And Chris is going to give you examples that'll fill those in. Chris?
Okay. Are there any questions of anything so far for Ted? It is a quiet group. All right. Well, we're gonna roll up our sleeves a little bit more and get going here with some possible ideas. Now, with everything that Ted has shared with you, I hope you kind of got the sense too that as you were looking at all of those skills, there's a pile of them for this organizing idea of matter alone. And one of the things that I hope you heard him say was that you need to be quite intentional about what you're going to do here. And I'm going to reiterate that this would be one of those organizing ideas that you absolutely need to know in the end, what is your target big summative going to be? Because if you don't have that in mind and you're thinking you're going to kind of figure it out as you go along and start unpacking stuff with the kids, and then I'll kind of develop it, you're going to get lost in all of the concepts and skills that are in this particular organizing idea. There are so many of them, and it will be very easy to fall back just on, okay, I tested the content and I tested the skill ability, I'm moving on. And you will not get out of surface level at all. It just won't happen. So not everything is weighted equally in this particular organizing idea. And the other piece that I really want you to be cognizant of too is that there's lots of such as's in your document. So don't get lost in the such as a gotta do, because that's not it. And it's really easy in this unit to do that because there's so much information in there. It is an action-packed one. The other piece to this is you're going to have to be very aware very quickly on how much your students know from previous grades. Now, they're not coming to you from the new grade. So knowing what they know is going to be really critical here. Again, I said it yesterday, this is new territory for certainly for kindergarten, and to have a discrete subject, like they've never had science before. But you in primary and have never had discrete, you've always had discrete units. So I remember a grade 2 teacher saying to me in summertime when we were unpacking science for the first time, she said, I have no idea. And I've been teaching for almost 30 years. I don't know what a grade 6 teacher teaches or a grade 5 teacher teaches in science, because we all teach in our own little box, not because we're in a classroom, but because in science, we are masters of the topics that are in our grade, because we start it and we finish it, and then nobody ever gets to see it again, really, until they get into junior high and then they start unpacking some things. So this is really different territory that you are now planning for, because you are planning this unit on matter in grade 2 with the assumption that they are coming to you with all of the terminology, understanding of matter, properties of objects, definition of objects from kindergarten and grade 1 to just launch into grade 2. And could I just teach them the stand up, like Ted said, just give it to them? Absolutely, you can. But there will be no continuation, there'll be no carryover, and you're sure not going to get to a transfer very quickly, because they have all these holes that are missing in between. So part of my starting point today will be to show you, first of all, this is what's happened prior to grade 2. All right, this is the matter that they're coming to you in theory from grade 1. Now remember, in the science folder, and especially for those who are new, you'd have access to everything else. So if before I start planning this unit, I go, oh my gosh, I don't think my kids know any of this, then go back a grade and grab some of the slides or grab some of the activities and just do them. You'd be well intended that way, just to back up, put the brakes on a little bit, and just pick up some of those key concepts that we need, especially in the skill pieces that the students won't have. They just won't have that to carry it over. So they've done a topic of matter. They defined what matter is. They've really unpacked that in kindergarten, the object. Then we get into properties of objects in grade 1 as well. And we talk about how we're going to measure some of those properties. What are length, area, and mass as measurement tools, skills? That's we have to learn. So again, I'm not necessarily sure that all the grade 2s are going to know that when they're in my class unit. So I might have to do a little backup there. This is what I've always said. This is the year to have a split. If you got a split class, this is the bonus year for you. Looking at examining properties with tools, they looked at how would they describe the properties of an object. They could use a magnifying, they could use a weigh scale, they could take their hands and feel it. The 5 senses. If your grade 2s don't know the 5 senses, you've got to back up. You got to at least pick that up, because that's an important way for them to describe some of the things that are going to happen in grade 2. So we're assuming that they know that. And then how do properties change? Like, what are ways that I can change them? What are ways that, what are the actions that I can do that would change them? Like, I could take a piece of paper and I can crumple it up. I could cut it. I can tear it. I could hit it with a hammer, but it's not necessarily going to do anything to it. So it's what are the tools that can change the property of an object? That's all coming out of K1. So it's important that we know this one here, because it links into this one here, which is really yours. So we're looking at materials now, properties of materials, the things that made the matter, that made the objects. So the materials, what is the making of that object? What's the purpose of it? Why did we make it? Why do we even have it, right? There's that linkages. And all of these 3 colors, it'll be really hard for you to separate them as discrete units, because they all tie into each other. At some point, they just keep revisiting back into each other. So if you're feeling like, wow, I feel like I keep going into the types of materials, and I'm even talking about why I would use it, you're right, because it's going to come right back in full circle all the time. So don't, because they're in colors, just necessarily treat these as discrete units, because they will tie together all the time as you're going through them. So you're looking at how you make them for a purpose, you make the object, the materials that I choose purposefully for whatever the object is going to be used for. And why would I want to test and measure them? Like, what's the purpose of that? Like, if I just made it, who cares? It should work, right? But no, we want to know that does it do the purpose that it's supposed to? And if so, how would I test to make sure it's going to do that? So I have a couple in here that I've given you. What types of materials do we have? We have natural, and then we have man-made. Okay, so between those 2, processed and the natural product, which ones are which? And then do I ever take the naturals and turn them into processed, right? Those will be some that fit into both categories. And then influences, the purpose that I'm going to have this object for will also influence the kind of materials I'm going to use. What am I going to do with this thing? So there are two big pieces to this, the suitability and availability and sustainability. Do you have enough resources? You could make something. I could make a fantastic little model airplane and use every resource that I have and not have any sustainability of that resource. I've used everything there is, and it's just going to be a one-off. So what is the sustainability of being able to make that thing? And then what's the sustainability of the object you've just created? Is this going to break the first time I use it? Is it structurally sound? And that gets still into grade 3 again, so it moves up a bit. So there's little bits and pieces here. And as I was planning this together, I said it to Ted this afternoon we met, I said, wow, my brain has just exploded because there is so much in this unit. There's no way that I can address it all, but also you can't either. And you have to think about how are you gonna, what's the big PBA at the end, summative that you want to use to get to the understanding so that you can stay focused on what are the such ases that I'm not going to address and what are the pieces that I'm going to really focus on. That's going to be really important here. Looking at the purpose and the influence and the choice also takes into account different opportunities of jobs. What are different occupations that are using different kinds of objects and creating and different materials that they make things and they have specific purposes for them. So I'm going to do a little less on that because there is one video that I've given you and there's a storybook in here that also talks about that. And I will, in this section, talk a little bit more maybe about the First Nations, Métis and Inuit. What are some of the links that we have there? Okay, so I'm going to go through, I'm not giving you all the slide decks here. I've just picked out the pieces that would be foundational for grade 2. So you definitely need to know, make sure that they know what the objects are. Characteristics and properties are two terms that were defined and used with the students. We unpacked them with the student, not giving them stand up and deliver. And then we tied it to, these are not separated just because he's in here. These are always bouncing back and forth because you can't do one without the other. And then you just keep bringing back the other side and you go back to the other side. So in here was the senses. How do I interact with matter? How do I actually physically pick up something? And what do I do when I pick it up? What do I sense? I feel there's rough surfaces. Those are also material descriptions that would come into play. So if I don't have them from here, I'm going to have a tough time giving them to you in grade 2. Some of the things for objects, these are just definitions more for you right now, just so that you know where they're coming from. And some of the characteristics that we talked about, right? So color, size, shape, and texture. So students were engaged with sorting cards. Those are found in the kindergarten and the grade 1 file folder. I didn't put them in grade 2, but you're welcome to go get them if you think that would be a good starting point for you. Just give them all the cards and just say sort them. Don't give them any rules. Don't give them anything. That would be a really good formative for you to find out what they know and what they don't know, just right off the top. And I may give you things like we put foods together, colors together, we put places that you could see together, that kind of thing. Whatever their categories were, you can just start making a list. But it'll also help you to see how quickly you could start to move towards the properties of material descriptions, because I am going to have to lean on those other ones as well. So this is what all the cards look like. Just give them to them and let them go at it. In the end, though, I do need to make sure that they understand what the 5 senses are and that they're familiar with them and that they can articulate what would each one of those encompass. It doesn't have to be long-winded, just as a review, but if you need to go back there, for sure, I would do that. And then maybe I've given them header cards in there too with each of the 5 senses. Maybe you want to give them those 5 cards and give them the cards and just see if they can sort them. And the nice part about this activity is a number of the cards will fit into more than one sense. And that's what you would hope to hear from the students is that I don't know where to put this one. It could go here or it could go here. Well, maybe you have a conversation, you put it between the two, right? And then you can have those conversations because materials will have properties that are multiple in nature. They're not just for one particular aspect. So again, it's linking all of this directly to where you want to go in grade 2. They talk about the difference between mass and weight. You're talking about the word mass mostly in this particular organizing idea for grade 2. And so again, we gave them things like an example of here's 2 McDonald's coffee cans. They're both the same size. They're both, what I don't know is if they both have their lids on them, I could pick them up and I could tell you something about them. I could tell you that one's heavier than the other because one's empty and the other one's full. And so again, it's that comparison that we want them to be able to do. There's my tool. My tool is my hand. It doesn't have to be a weigh scale. I should be able to give you that knowledge just from touch alone and the weight of it. Going into grade 1, we did spend some time yesterday having a conversation about the strong linkages in Science 1 this time and Math 1. They were very, very strongly tied, and they would be strongly recommended to really see if you can match and parachute those together. And a lot of the manipulatives that you've got running over here, money included, would be things that I could absolutely leverage for talk in science in the same time. So again, you could bounce these back and forth. You could use Cuisenaire rods because you're talking about length, you're talking about sorting, color, length, size, whatever you want to do. You could have which ones fit on top of a blue, different combinations. So you're making the elements of that property. I can show different ways to make a blue. That's that same notion of the property of a blue. I could use pattern blocks to do the same thing. So again, these might even be starting points for grade 2. Just mix and match these together and just say sort them. See what they do. Do they put all the bars in one and the other? Do they sort by color? What's their rationale for it? How would they describe each of these? Those types of things. Talk about length. It could be simple things that are in the classroom. You know, can they just show you something as simple as 3 different sizes of lengths, and how would they say those to you? Not just show them to me, but how do they explain it to me? This one is longer, this one the longest, this is the shortest, right? Having that descriptive language and comparative language, that's grade 1. And so again, they need to be able to articulate that to us in grade 2. I could go outside and find sticks on the ground and use that for length of measurement. How many sticks would be the length of my hand or my arm or my shoe or whatever, my backpack or whatever you've got outside, or maybe you've taken them to a playground area. How many sticks would you need to measure a certain area? That's the measurement piece. It doesn't have to be with a meter stick and with a ruler. So these are the pieces that we want to make sure that they're grounded in before you start talking about the material properties, because the language from here transfers to grade 2. The area conversation isn't about length times width, it's about how much surface got covered. So you could take a can and put it on top of a grid and just trace around it, and take a small box and trace around it and say which one covered more squares. They don't have to know anything about centimeters squared or just which one covered more. That's really all I need to know. If you've got some baskets or barrels outside for garbage in the playground, which one's bigger? Which one covers more surface on the ground compared to something else? Whatever. Hula hoops, which one covers most area, least amount of area here? Or take 2 hula hoops that are the same and just pile a bunch of stuff randomly in them. And then which one is more full? Which one has more area covered in it just visibly? And you can show me that because I can compare them side by side. Okay, those are the kinds of things that we're talking about. For mass, definitely they could use a weigh scale. We provided sort of it's a tiered approach here if you wanted to use some of those or just watch them, sort of working your way through. Talking about mass, one of the questions too that often comes up with children is, does air have mass? Does air weigh something? And, you know, they'll think, oh, well, my hands are out here, but I don't feel anything. I don't think anything's hitting me. So the sort of the old fashioned standalone, that's always a good one, is the balance with the balloons, is blow 2 balloons up that are the same size, hang them one from each end of a meter stick, balance it on your finger, and then have somebody very slowly put a pin in so that the air starts to come out. And as it starts to shrink on one side, of course, my meter stick is starting to tilt. If the balloons are the same weight, the only thing that could change would be the weight of the air. As the air is escaping, it's losing it. So this is a way to show children that when it's confined in a space, then air can be measured. And if you've never been able to get a balloon to have a pin in it without exploding in your face, here's a how-to kind of thing to do. I know balloons are not everybody's favorite, so you might want to get somebody who doesn't care about that. Tools, again, we talked about this. Tools could be weigh scales that are in your classroom. They could be an actual weigh scale where they could read and just see. Again, I don't have to know how it works, but I could just see which one goes further in numbers. That tells me which one weighs more. Using a magnifying glass, using touch, the senses to describe things. So again, these are all those pieces that they would have arrived at your doorstep having already had exposure to. So again, there are some videos in here if you wanted to do some of those with them. They're the sort of the highlight ones that I would say I would probably consider if you wanted to do some backtracking. Again, actions of change. What can I do to make a change? I can cut things, I can bend them, I can twist them, I can stretch them, I can cut them, I can drop them, I can break them or not. Like maybe it's metal and I can't do any of those, right? It's just so thick, I can't do anything with it. So again, giving them opportunities to express that. And that would definitely come into play when we're talking about the properties of a material. Like which one of these materials can I twist and bend and which ones would be suitable for certain things. So this would be a good starting point as well. I just put a note on the bottom here that the stages of matter are in grade 3. So although I'm going to touch on them a little bit, the whole unpacking of the 3 different phases are something they unpack in grade 3. Okay, so let's have a look at bridging into grade 2 now. And I use that word deliberately, bridging, because I do think you're going to have to do a little bit of background bridging into what you want to talk about. But also, I said, keep in mind what's a good end of unit, whatever I'm going to target, so that I can stay focused on where I'm going to address my skills, and I'm going to address all the pieces that I need to do. And so I just put in here which material makes the strongest bridge, not a bridge to here, but a bridge as in a physical bridge. So that's something that we're not uncommon. It's not unheard of in grade 2. We've done those kinds of things with popsicle sticks and straws and whatever else. But that's a good one. If that's one that you want to do because it's familiar to you, there's the whole thing is unpacked here if you've never done it before. So that's an option. I'm not saying it's a must do, just wanted to give you some ideas of what you could do. But when I look at, when I look at just the properties of the materials, okay, just that focus, I'm looking at whatever property I'm going to use is going to determine the purpose that I want that particular object to be used for. So obviously, if I'm going to be making clothing to wear, there are definite materials and properties of those materials that I'm going to want to use. I'm definitely not going to want to use like a burlap sack to make a shirt that's really rough and itchy and hurting and scratching and whatever. Obviously, that wouldn't be the correct material in this case to make a shirt. But when we're looking at those types of properties of the materials that we're going to use, we're looking at things like transparency, absorption, malleability, length, and mass. Could I, as a grade 2 teacher, launch right into this slide and just start teaching them? I absolutely could. I could absolutely tell you what transparency is and give you an example and give you some hands-on things and do it for every one of these. But that will not guarantee that they have enough background knowledge of properties to give you what you're going to need down the road. So this is where that stand up and delivery part isn't really going to work here. I'm not actually unpacking these individually. I'm unpacking these as we introduce specific objects and talk about their materials. That's where I would bring in, so can you see through this? Like, do we need to see through this? Do I even care about seeing through this? Oh, I can, but I can't see very clearly, right? So those are ways that I can start to bring these in once I already know that they know some properties. And then the testing we'll talk about in just a second. So starting point, maybe just a quick formative. Maybe you want to just check out what language they have. These are just screenshots of worksheets that I've included for you, but they're starting points. If you think they know all this, then just ignore all this, but they're just suggestions. These are like which one doesn't belong. So if the word is round and they've got 4 pictures, which ones would you take out? Why did you want to take that one out? Let's see what kind of vocabulary they use. And is it scientific vocabulary, right? Let's get them to that point. They've got some pictures up here with some labels on them. if you just gave them a Venn diagram that said round and smooth, where would they put everything? What would show up in the middle? And then again, how would they articulate that to you? So these are in your folder, and I'll show these to you in just a second. But I might want to go a little bit further. I just want to just see that they know, in fact, what materials and properties of materials are. So again, if you think we need a bit of a review, even bringing in a little bit of grade 1, this would be an excellent starting point. And I've made a suggestion here that if you're going to use this, and this is one that I would say is a great one for everyone to just bank off of at some point, but they have lots of questions in it. So they'll talk about a particular material property, and then they'll ask a bunch of questions. I would say pause your video at that point and just answer them with the kids. Just talk to them about it and see what kind of language you're getting from them. By the time you're done that video, they're going to have a really good little bit of a toolbox of their own now that they're going to be able to leverage as you move forward when you start talking about materials in specific types of materials for specific purposes. Again, have some items from the video on hand, so you might want to watch this ahead of time, or just let them go into the classroom and say, can you find some of the things that we saw in the video? Go find them in the classroom. And now they can actually physically hold them and touch them and see them with their senses. And are they able to describe those words again and those properties that we were talking about that they saw in the video? So just making that link for them. Again, when we start unpacking materials and purpose, how I choose my material and the design and the construction of that material has to match with the purpose of the item that I'm going to do. So as I go back, or I put some questions up here, would you like a metal shirt? Right? I can make a metal shirt. You could weld a metal shirt. Some kids might say, guys might say, yeah, that'd be really cool, except you're limited in movement. So I can't do much with it. I'm not going to be able to move my body where I want to go. I can't bend over. So again, we're having those conversations. Would you like plastic reading glasses? So maybe if I was 3 years old and playing with glasses, that's great. But if I'm using my glasses on my head to read, then just having just plastic that I might not be able to focus through isn't going to be very, very plausible. Same thing with here. Why is an umbrella built the way it is? Why is the handle stiffer and the same material not used for the umbrella part that goes over our head? Well, because it'd be too heavy, for one. And two, I don't need it. I just need some light plastic that keeps me dry and keeps the water repelling, and it doesn't absorb the water. The plastic keeps it off. So those are the kinds of things that are talked about in this video here. Makes them start thinking intentionally about the purpose and the property. How are they getting matched together? There are a million things that you could do here, to be honest with you. Where to start is just knowing where the kids are at. You might want to do just a bit of a case study with them. So let's go a little bit deeper. So let's assume we have some of our language, we have some of our differentiation, we understand properties of different materials, and that there are a variety of different kinds of products that can be made. Maybe we just do a quick group case study just to consolidate thinking and maybe to check for my own self that in fact they're where they're supposed to be. Pick something that's obscure. Anything that you could find that they would not be able to necessarily have at home. So I gave you a picture, and it depends on your age. Some of you might know what this is. Some of you might say, I have no idea, not been there. So if you were in school more than 20 years ago, then you probably had this as a student, and this would be called, it was a cone that we used to teach conic sections. So if you have a lamp that sits in your living room, bedroom, beside your bed, and you turn it on, the reflection of the light up on the wall and down on your night table or wherever, if you're sitting by the couch, has some specific shapes to it. And that's part of what happens if we were to take a saw and take a cone like this and just slice right through. And that's what we used to teach in school. So I was pretty sure that most of you wouldn't have this sitting around, and I'm taking it into kindergarten classes before, and the kids have just, oh, it's a pyramid, it's a triangle, right? Of course, they've never seen it before, but when we just talk about it, we let them touch it, we let them take it apart. And that's the whole idea, is that we would teach that here's the reflection you would get from the light on the wall. It just goes up. Okay, we get these different things, and if we slice it off, that's where it comes from. If I take an angle slice here, that's how I would get an oval. That's how you get a trapezoid. If you go straight across, that's how you get your circle. In other words, this cone slice actually sets up the shapes that we study in school, right from kindergarten up. That was the whole idea, but it gets really in depth in older grades. So then we put it back together again, and then we unpack all the pieces, and we find out it's made of wood. And then I ask them, do you think that this could have a different property other than wood? Do you think we could make it out of plastic? Do you think this is something that would be okay to make out of plastic and that we could pull the plastic apart? And the general consensus is usually yes, right? So then we go through the whole thing. What else could we make it out of? Should we make it out of plasticine? Should we make it out of metal? Like, what should we? So having that conversation with them with something that's completely foreign to them is a great way for me to know what kind of feedback I'm getting from the students. And then it's kind of, what's your fave? Let's let them go find something. Maybe it's a hobby that they have and there's something that they use in that hobby. Maybe it's a sport that they play. Maybe it's something, it's an item that they really like. I put up here, I like skiing, right? There's my fave. So now, what are the tools in skiing that I have to use? What are the properties of my particular object that I have? Why are my skis made the way they are? What are the things in there that help me? Could my skis be made of paper? Could I have made them of cardboard, right? So exploring those things. But now this is an opportunity for them to consolidate their thinking and bring to you an object that they're familiar with. So it's not the object that I want to test, it's their understanding. So grabbing a familiar object to them that they're very comfortable with, maybe something that they know a lot about, how can they unpack that in terms of science for us? So making some of those connections. This is part of that worksheet that I showed you at the beginning. So if you were looking for some of those sort of opening ideas, but also look at the titles that you see here, materials of common properties, sorting those kinds in Venn diagrams, and materials and their uses. Those are kind of the things that we're really wanting to cover in grade 2. They're in a sequential order. I'm not suggesting you do all of these or any of these. I mean, they're only there for a link for you to use. If you want them, they're up here. And when you go into this link, you will have multiple different options to look at in each one of those. It's not one off. There's several of them. Several that you can go in for free. There's no cost for these. It's K5. And so you're able to access those as a teacher at any time. The other one would be, what about the testing part? Remember, we had our branch over here that said, how are we going to test and measure that what we built is really doing the job it's supposed to do? So I make a canoe out of cardboard. Made a great canoe, looks wonderful. Now I want to test it. So I take it out to the lake and I test it and it floats and it's doing well. But the problem is the cardboard I chose isn't treated cardboard. And I'm starting to get pretty soggy on the bottom after 20 minutes and I'm finding that I'm going to probably sink, right? So again, we have that conversation. So testing sometimes is the last thing people think about. They just think, let's make it. Let's just make it. So those bridges that we used to make out of popsicle sticks or whatever you wanted to, we always had a challenge for them to test. It had to hold something. That was your test. Is your foundation strong enough? Did you build it strong enough? And then can I go back and change whatever I need to change in order to make that work? So in here, I'm asking you a cardboard chair. So this particular link, I can go to this one. This is from PBS. They are also educational for people who aren't aware that teachers have full access to all of their videos. PBS has an entire series on matter. But what I liked about this one is this is specific to materials. This is not about the objects per se. It's about what do you make. And so the three little cartoonists, our Quinks, have made a paper, cardboard, very well constructed chair. And they've given it to her as a gift. And what happens over these videos is they unpack, is this a good use of the proper resources for the product that I'm trying to do? So again, this is a suggested use. You don't have to use it, but there are definitely pieces in here. You could just show them the first one and then unpack it with the students as a class if that's what you wanted to do. Okay. types of materials, whether it's man-made, whether it's processed, right? How do I know the difference between them? Do I know the difference between them? So all I did yesterday is I went around the house and just collected a few things at random really quickly. Took a picture of them. I mean, we could do that with go to the staff room, go to the classroom, go to the science lab, pick up stuff and just take it to class and just see what they've got. And how am I going to classify those? Are they going to be man-made or are they natural? So an apple is natural, my tomatoes are natural. And then some of these definitely, I mean, I've got glass, I've got scissors, I've got tongue depressors on here, I've got shelf liner on here, cutlery. I put some things on here for you in case you want to do a quick discussion on this and somebody asks you, well, is salt natural or is salt man-made, right? And you might say, I think they're all natural, or I think they're all man-made. So I gave these to you more for you. If you want a little background knowledge, I'll just let you go and check them out. Same thing with the seashells. How would you answer that? Right? Are they man-made or are they actual? So let's just leave that. Same thing with glass. So these are just suggestions that I would have. It ties into everything you've been doing so far. So to have a separate whole unit just on that alone, it's already been embedded in all the things that you've been doing. Another opportunity to get property discussions and language coming out from the students. And in this one, remember the suitability, that goes back to my chair even. Is the cardboard a good idea, right? I want to spend a little bit of time up here because I'm guessing that that might be an area that people need more support in. I'm going to ask that question of you, or just keep that in mind to throw in the chat box at the end, or just unmute yourself, is do you in these sessions need more First Nations support like materials? And if so, that's fine. I will always add more. I can't add a fraction of what I have in my bank. So that's my other offer to you, that if you are planning something, maybe you're not using the example I've given you, but you have a different one. If you need more info, just send me an email. I will go through my bank and send you whatever I have. I have tons of stuff. It's just impossible to put it all in here. So let's have a look at purpose, right? When we look at things like, and remember there's a long list of such as's under there. And depending on the area you live in will also depend on what you might want to look at. I just chose the birch bark canoe. It's listed in there, but it doesn't mean that's where you have to go. But birch trees are common in Alberta, and that's one of the easy ones for us to look at and to have a conversation about, because in our First Nations peoples were able to leverage the birch bark from the tree to do lots of things, but one of them was to construct their canoes. And so they would use the branches to build the framework of the canoe. And because at certain times of the year, birch bark is really easy to peel off the tree, they would take it off of the tree at that point, and they would soften it, and then they would start to put it in and use it as their layer to create the actual canoe's hub. But birch trees have a lot of other uses to them as well. There's also something called birch bark biting, which you can make patterns, and that's still being done today. So if you've heard the term but never seen it in action, I've given you a link up here for it. If you've never known that you can actually make birch bark soup, and that is also done in Indigenous culture, there's another option. It's not just about the canoe. Or you can tap into a birch bark tree like you tap into maple trees, and you can get syrup out of them. So these are just ideas. This book here comes from the series called Grandmother and Grandfather series. It's Grandmother, Grandfather, Tell Me. It's at the beginning when I showed you the clip in the acknowledgement, they were talking about woman, and they were talking about the power that a woman has and the reverence that a woman has, and in what areas. So there are certain things that grandfathers would tell stories about, and then there are definitely certain things that only the grandmothers would tell stories about, because it's the woman's responsibility in that area. And so that's why you see it say grandfather tell us about, and other ones it'll say grandmother tell us about. But it's a series of books. I have the link at the end. They're wonderful. I had purchased them for our school division. I'm going to get out of this one here. They're all going to start. So here's another one for Inukshuk. again, grade 2s are familiar with that, but that's a natural product. We can go get rocks, right, and talk about that. But here's a story about that. Or the igloo, where they use walrus tusks for the tool to cut the ice. I'm using the natural ice to create my home. And then I'm starting to leverage what are the things that I have to do to live in that. So again, it comes from that series as well. Another piece that we put in to grade 1 and grade 2 actually in living systems was our discussion about the buffalo. And the buffalo, remember, is a reverent animal. It's a sacred animal to Indigenous First Nations cultures because it provided their life-saving, their sustenance for everything that they needed. There was nothing in a buffalo that was not kept or used, whether it was ground down, whether it was used as a tool, whether it was food that they had, whether it was the fur that they used for warmth, whether it was the hide that they, or the tanned skin that they used for their teepees. All of it got used. And in grade 2 science, you have a reference in grade 2 math, you have a reference to the winter count. And the winter count comes back to how they used the hide or the teepees as a reference point in keeping track in a circular motion of what happened every year. So it was like their calendar. And so again, this is how we could put duration of time in math, the winter count, and the science all together into one, right? So there's another piece. This link here, I won't go into it, is the same one that I shared with you in Living Systems, but if you haven't seen it, when you click it on, it's a bunch of other links that I put together for you about the buffalo, about seals for the Inuit. So again, it's just a tool for you to go to as a reference. If you have enough information, then please don't worry about that. Here are some other books that come from that series. So these would be the sacred, 4 sacred medicines that they use. Again, I could have students look these up in grade 2. We could divide them up into groups. These are natural, but they also have products that come out of each of these that they make and that they're using for these as well. So these would be, again, the areas from the, and you'll see that 2 of them are grandmother and 2 of them are grandfather. You could do, as Ted said in one of his conversations, we could give them a Venn diagram. Maybe you want to do a comparison between a natural and a man-made. What would go in between? Or change whatever topic you want to put on there. Again, you have those options to use. Possible resources. So there's a number of books I've been looking with publishers. These ones are from Pearson. I've been hounding them. So for those of you who are just new to this, I've been hounding them all to give me whatever they have. And Pearson has very generously opened up their library and let me go in and have a look. I can't download the book, but I can definitely give you screenshots of books that would work with this. And I'll show you a link at the end if it's something that you're interested in. I know some people had been emailing us asking for resources. They had some money that they wanted to buy some little books, even if you just had one. This one is great for the scientific method, very appropriate for grade 1 up. And it talks just about getting them going, but also just ask some really good questions about why do we ask questions? Why do we test something? Like what's the purpose behind that? The other one would be Sort It. This is getting to the senses and getting to different properties that I use to describe the things that I'm giving to you from an object. This is another one where I have comparative language in it. So again, it gives me an opportunity. This is another one. This one is on states of matter. Now, although it talks about the 3 different states of matter, most of the book is actually linked to grade 2. So it talks about man-made and natural products in here as well. So this is a book that I would say fits into both. They talk about the different pieces in here. Here's the table of contents, and the topic or the book cover looks like this. One that gets into what you're doing, although it talks about solids and liquids, it also talks about natural products, man-made products. So solids and liquids fits into both grade 2 and grade 3. Analyze It is another one where, again, this is about the testing. Why do I care about testing something? This is why. What questions do I ask when I want to test something? How do I organize my data and how do I analyze my data? So again, very appropriate for where we want them to be in this particular unit. And this one might be, I left it in here, but I think it might be more for grade 3, but it's a graphic states of matter, but it's graphic. It's a graphic magazine. And I know kids are really into this right now. These also have teacher resource manuals. And then there's that one on matter. And this one is very appropriate for grade 2, no other grade. There are some other places you can go. I've included another PowerPoint in here, a slide deck that you can use if you want to just look at sort of the properties of matter again. And then also down here, properties of materials. There are 4 lessons that are linked in here. These are just additional into what we had. I'm not suggesting you would do all of them. I think you need to find what your goal is. Those grandfather and grandmother series, this is sort of the citation that goes for it. This is what it belongs to. You can access the, if it's something you're interested in, through Native Reflections. They're out of Edmonton, so it's a local one. And this teacher's guide goes with every book. There's a lesson plan for every book. There's worksheets for every book. There's quizzes, there's activities, there's coloring, there's matching, it's a nice little series. I really think it's well laid out. And these are just some sources and resources. So this is where you would find sort of some of the books that I'm talking about here. Here's the ones that I just showed you from Pearson's. And they have offered as well that if a teacher, anybody wants to go in and have a 30-day free trial into their library and just look at all the books like I'm seeing them, the link is right here. So you can just sign up for it at any time. I did ask them, I actually was talking to them, it's $140 for a teacher for a year to use their library in perpetuity. So, because I just wanted to know how much it would be. So anyway, that's just a side point, but it's worth going in and just having a look if there are some things that you're trying to build a library from. Maybe that's an opportunity. Okay. We do have some other ones coming, but they haven't yet arrived from Nelson, and they're doing some scouring from BC for us and from Ontario to see what they have in their curriculums that will fit for us. And then I'll share those with you as soon as I get them. All right, so this will also be in your folder. You will have access to everything there and use whatever you wish to use. That's entirely up to you. So to find it, I'll go to the website. For those of you who know the website, then you don't need to stay with that part of it. But all of the templates that Ted showed you, all of the sort of unpacking of the concept pieces, those are all in your folder. And you can just download those at will whenever you want. There's no rush to do that tonight or tomorrow. And just a reminder too that gizmos are also one of those tools that you can use. They're found on the New Learn Alberta site, or you can go to one of the sessions in January. They're called awareness sessions. What they do is they give you a login and a password. There's no cost for the company that holds gizmos, and they have all of them in one site. Then all the math and science are together. And right now there's nothing posted to the science for resources. So you can go in and use the science ones at any time. They're like an interactive workbook, interactive worksheet, if that's what you want to call them. Very engaging for the kids. They really do love them. Okay, so let me just make sure we have everything we need. All right, so let me take you to the website for those who would like to. For those who, let me just go to this first. I'm going to bring that back up again in case you're brand new to this, and I apologize because I know some of you are brand new and you're here for the first time. Here are our links and contact information, so reach out at any time if you have things that you would like. And where we house everything is on the Moving Forward website. All right, let's go there. Okay, I'll put it in the chat box if you are new or you're not sure if you have the right link. I'll stick it in chat. And so when you signed up for the cohort group, you also received a second email that said, welcome to the Moving Forward website, and it gave you a login and a password. And if you've lost it, no problem. You can still go in there, just use the forgot my info, just go in through here. But where you're going to go to get all your information is in here where it says cohort groups, go to science. And then you'll see that you have all of the folders are listed here. All you need to do is go into grade 2. And then by tomorrow, you'll probably see the next one, which will say matter on it, session 3. And you can go back into these at any time. You can go in and pick up anything at any time. These are not timed to end at the end of this year. We may add things to them as we start unpacking more and maybe we see if there's any refinements to the curriculum. But truthfully, all of this is going to be up in perpetuity. Like, it's not going down. They'll be up there for next year as well. So you don't have to race and panic. If you are brand new and you need the curriculum comparison and the numbered outcomes documents, they're sitting right here for you as well. So you can just download those and just keep them on your computer. Okay. I'm just going to stop